have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Nathan Hammer, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and should I say good morning and good day for those of you in the far east, west of the international date line, of course, of the United States and Hawaii, which is part of the United States. Not to mention, I am broadcasting from the city of Angels, where it is a little past 7 o'clock. And for those of you folks on the East Coast, it is past 10 p.m., along with my guest, who I all urge you go to our social media sites to check out who it is. And I haven't said it yet, but you should already know that you are on Dr. J Radio Live, the same name as every single social media outlet, from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I just don't want to go down the list, but the point is, just remember, DRJ Radio Live, and of course the website.com. Throw that in there. And not to mention, this is truly the only internationally syndicated show bringing all of humanity the news of the world that you do not hear on CNN, Fox, or BBC. And let me say this, we also have to introduce my guest, who is live in London, and I have to give him a happy shout out for being awake, staying awake so late to do this show. Literally 3:02 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Johnny Webb, how you doing tonight? You there, Johnny?
Sorry, there's always a delay, isn't there, for us?
Yeah. Well, that's the problem with being literally 8 hours, 8 time zones apart.
I know, and also this computer working in the background doing heaps.
Well, nonetheless, while I'm giving you guys a quick minute to ponder over our social media and our website, so you see our guest, who has been a guest on this show for several years. And this March will be my 7th year in broadcasting alternative news to the world. So we are very happy about that. Not to mention that we are syndicated, as I said, on our very own Coast to Coast PM radio network. Not to mention PSN radio, late night in the Midlands, and in the UK, thanks to Johnny Webb for making those deals. Deprogram Radio Network, and recently who approached us is Pulse Talk Radio Network. Not to mention TuneIn.com, Shoutcast, and iTunes, and so much more. Even YouTube, you could hear this live on YouTube. Now, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of news, and then, of course, I'm going to introduce my guest, which I'm hoping by now all of you around the globe who are listening live have already checked out the site throughout the day or in the last couple minutes. First piece of news, I might have said it the other night, but I just think it's a good thing to say again today, since it's still making headlines all across every news channel. And I'm talking about not the local news channels. I'm talking about Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, all those national news channels here, not to mention BBC, which we get here in America as well. And that is Trump canceling, saying he wants to cancel the Air Force One. And as you know, most people don't know this, but we actually fly 2 of them. And I believe George W. Bush said, maybe we should start flying 3 of them. And it's not like they fly one just as a decoy. They have it completely stocked and ready to go with food, supplies, everything. So everything that's not used gets thrown away. And a lot of money is being spent. And because a Boeing 747 costs $400 million, the Air Force One each would cost $4 billion. That is $3.6 billion more, or should I say 10 times the amount. A staggering amount of money. Times 2, if not 3, that's $8 to $12 billion alone. So We'll see what happens. Is he going to upgrade Trump Force One and build another one? As he always used to brag during his campaign trail, that if he was to be elected president, flying in Air Force One would be a downgrade from Trump Force One, which I see why he would say that, because Trump Force One is made for comfort. It has a lot of gold leathering with his emblem of his family, and gold silverware and gold-plated plates, you name it. But remember, Air Force One is literally the Oval Office in the air, and it has all these armaments to prevent things such as EMPs and several classified things that we do not know. Now, here's another big piece of news that I want to talk about, and then I want to introduce my guest because he has some things to talk about this today. This is a very, very sad day for all of America and the entire world. Why? Because someone at age 95, mind you, John Glenn, astronaut John Glenn, has passed away. He flew back in, I believe it was the late 50s, early 60s, the first orbital he orbited Earth 3 times in that flight. And then in 1998, to test what a senior citizen aging would do in space on a senior citizen, he went back and he blew everybody away by outperforming everybody just by being that. Not to mention he was a United States Senator. So enough with the news. Let's get on with our guest. He is a lecturer, an author, and of course he travels the world and researches. An on-hand researcher, not an armchair researcher, and that's why I truly respect him and am happy to call him a friend. That happens to be the one and only Mr. Peter Robbins. Peter, welcome back, buddy.
Good evening, Doctor. Good to hear your voice again.
It's a pleasure. Let's talk about John Glenn for a bit, because I think the world needs to hear how important he was, especially since we're approaching 50 countries where people have asked questions live during the show or emailed to make comments or make guest requests. Nonetheless, it's over 43, not quite 45, and not 50, but we're approaching 50 countries, which actually shocked the heck out of me when we became international. So because of that, I think the countries that may have not been so much in the know and paying attention to what NASA was going through in its early days, competing with the Soviet space program, to us Americans, it is a huge loss, and he is an American legend beyond words can describe.
Yes, well said. And what's been occurring to me over these last hours is in our culture here in America, and in world culture to a degree, we overuse certain words, love, genius, hero, to such a degree that the words dull down. They mean less than they really mean or should mean. And with the loss of John Glenn, America has truly lost one of its great heroes of the 20th century and into the 21st century. He came from that generation that is known here as the greatest generation. Grew up in a small town in Ohio, joined the Navy right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, like so many other young patriotic men and women.
Literally, they signed up the next day, December 8th,
yes.
They were there. Yeah.
Yes, very much so. And I, like most people, I remember generally that he was a World War II veteran, but as a Navy flyer, he flew almost 60 combat missions in the South Pacific as a Marine fighter pilot. And then during Korea, he flew another 90 combat missions. On one of his Korean missions, he returned so badly shot up that they counted I think the number was 375 holes in his plane. The kind of thing where these guys didn't talk about it. It was just a fact of their life. He became a naval test pilot after that, and it was not until 1962 that he really put himself on the international map and decidedly into the American psyche. He was the first American to fly around the Earth, and he did it 3 times in February of 1962 at a maximum altitude of 162 miles, moving at over 17,000 miles an hour. Now, these stats, for anybody that's followed the astronaut program for decades and decades now, are minuscule numerically compared to some of the accomplishments that followed Glenn. But he was the first. These men knew that the chances were not bad, that they would not be coming back, and yet they did it anyway. Part of it was old patriotic spirit. Kennedy had instilled in us a ferocious devotion to a space program. And for guys my age, gals too, who are old enough to remember when he flew, he really was heroic. And as you age, the firemen and the cowboys and the astronauts that were your heroes in youth often fade away for other replacement, more mature heroes. Firemen are still among my favorites, and John Glenn was always in a place by himself. If any of your listeners want to read a wonderful book about the American space program, it was written by the great American writer Tom Wolfe, called The Right Stuff, and it was made into not a bad movie. And in the book and in the film, one of the most touching moments I remember had nothing to do with outer space. It had to do with Glenn's ferocious love for and protective attitude toward his wife, his childhood sweetheart. She suffered terribly from stuttering and did not like to speak in any public forum. And at one point in the mission, Vice President Johnson wants to get in to speak with her for a photo op, and she calls Glenn, and he says, "What do you want to do?" And she says, "I do not want to speak to him." And he said, "Then don't." And the Vice President of the United States did not get into the House and basically had egg on his face. As you know, Dr. J, he first ran for Congress in the 1960s, served many years, distinguished as a congressman, did go back into space as a senior citizen, something that blew a lot of our minds, and it wasn't a PR stunt. He was the best man for the job, and he did it.
That's right.
And 95 years, more power to him, but he was one of the good guys, and one of the people that made a lot of Americans proud to be Americans. And in these times of transition right now, I think it's important we hold his memory close, salute his accomplishments, and maybe reset our own bars a little bit higher than they were.
And to another astronaut who called into one of the mainstream shows to give the condolences to the family, we also have to give condolences to his family, but especially his wife, Annie, as you mentioned, who has been by his side through the whole time. And a couple things you touched on. He is truly an all-star American hero. I believe it was Ohio he was raised in.
Yes.
Small town. And like you said, outstanding Navy pilot, so much so that he was one of the favored people to become a test pilot. Now, these days, a lot of people look at test pilots and they just hear the word, test pilot doesn't mean much. Well, that is one of the most dangerous jobs. Why?
Yes.
Because you're flying something that you don't know is going to go into production. And lots of people are injured, if not killed.
Yes.
Test piloting.
certainly a higher percentage than regular pilots and pilots who work out the bugs in craft that are first flown by these extraordinary, courageous individuals who do it because it's an important job and it needs to be done, and they're good at it.
Exactly. And you did mention he was in Congress, and then he became a senator. Another thing he was trying to do, he wanted to be the leader of the free world, especially during the Cold War. And I believe it was 1984.
Correct.
He was trying to be the running mate for whoever was running against Ronald Reagan. Obviously, he served 2 terms, but this was after his first term. Didn't make it, but nonetheless, I think he would have made an outstanding president just because of his accomplishments in life and his dedication to the country and to humanity. So we all owe him a true blessing. And I know Johnny Webb obviously knows this news, has been watching it probably all day and all night since it's 3 a.m., past 3 a.m. at this time. Johnny, what do you have to say about John Glenn? Johnny boy.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I've actually still got a first question coming in there. Again, our condolences to the astronaut that again has died today. But what came in was another question for another astronaut, Buzz Aldrin, which had tweeted today that we're all in danger and it is evil itself. And he put a quick tweet up, and it came down very quickly afterwards. But someone's managed to capture it, and it shows the pyramids down there in Antarctica, quite close to the British Prince Elizabeth station. And there's 2 pyramids down there. I wondered, Peter, if you'd heard anything about this yourself.
I have heard, and I'm following the story the best I can. As you guys both know, the internet, miraculous as it is very much a double-edged sword.
Very.
And
yes.
There is, I think it's something we're going to be seeing more and more of in the future. A proletariat, an audience that is so enamored by news sources, especially if they're nice and shiny and have a cool-looking website, that more and more folks are being suckered into untrue news or flawed or research that is not backed up. This is a story I do think is true, and at the same time, there seems to have been a world culture connected to some degree, going back thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, where the pyramid form was repeated in many cultures all over the world. And this just adds another note of fascination, of connection, and the hope that in years to come it will be researched in a scholarly, thoroughly provable way, so that we can all appreciate all the more what official history deems as nonsensical, namely if it didn't happen before, 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, there was really nothing going on here except people grunting and hitting each other over the head shortly after they transformed from monkeys. And in fact, anything but was the case.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because when we had Grant Cameron on literally a week ago from tonight, we were talking about the pyramids, and I think it also came up with Richard Shaw this past Tuesday. And
yes.
The fact is that, like you said, these pyramids were in almost every single culture, and at the time frame that they date, there was no possible way that we had communication with each other, each culture. I mean, look at when Christopher Columbus finally landed in the New World, which technically I think was the Bahamas, and he encountered the Native Americans, very, very primitive, completely different tribe. I remember when the conquistadors came, not remember, I wasn't alive, but obviously reading about this, and they saw this ship to them, seeing a structure. It was just it blew them away because it's just I want to use the word alien, but don't want to use it because we're going to go into that topic in a second. But it was so vastly different from what they knew. This is a culture, Native Americans, that didn't even invent the wheel, which boggles my mind because they were playing a form of soccer, the Mayan culture was. So how can they not invent the wheel, yet they had something that rolled? Nonetheless, they were, again, hunters and gatherers, but the pyramids is a very big mystery that definitely needs scholarly attention and not to be just dismissed as random coincidences, because there is no coincidences that what's that saying? It's if someone calls you an ass, you say go away. Someone calls you an ass the second time, you say something stronger. Someone calls you an ass the third time, well, time to buy a saddle because essentially you're full. The point is, the pyramids exist in so many different lands that it's just too coincidental. You cannot, that are not linked with each other, that you cannot say that, before Christopher Columbus, there was another civilization that came here thousands of years ago from across the Atlantic Ocean and built them. No, doesn't work. But speaking of alien, I want to go to that topic since I know we can only do 1 hour tonight, which I think is extremely important. And you very, very candidly were able to tell us on this show a few times, especially to our global listeners and now to our other listeners that we have in the new network. Not to mention, of course, the iTunes and Shoutcast and TuneIn, about how this interest started because of your own family being involved in something like this, meaning your sister has been taken.
Yeah, it's certainly an account I've given over the years a number of times, namely that growing up in New York City, our folks moved us out to a lovely village on Long Island when my sister Helen and I were quite young. And it was there in the early 60s, playing together on a very quiet morning, as kids do, that we observed 5 disc-shaped objects coming in at a high rate of speed and stopping over the neighborhood. And it was so challenging, it was so overwhelming to me that I found a way over the next few weeks to put it out of my mind. I was a very straight little kid. I certainly saw my share of, B movies about aliens coming to Earth and things, but I now realize I fully accepted that implied message of the adult world that, these are entertainments, these are fantasies, and it's not really something that is going on. Of course, when you see a group of disc-shaped objects hovering above, about the size of aircraft, that are, disc-shaped, they have no appendages of any sort, you're in the presence of technology that nothing prepared you for. Ultimately, years later, and it was over 14 years later, until my sister and I talked about it, and I should say we were very close. It was just my choice, consciously and unconsciously, to not deal with this, until the memory resurfaced, again, 14-odd years later, and we did talk about it, and it was at that time that Helen first told me about her memories of what we would now call highlights of a UFO abduction type experience. I had never encountered any thoughts like this before, heard anybody say anything like this before. And it was, as it turned out, a life-changing event for me, although there was that delay of 14 years. Helen was very public about it for the rest of her life, and my obsession with what had happened to my sister and over time, many, many, many other people that I've met propelled me into what I will laughingly call this career rather than the career I thought I was going to have.
And thankfully, you did stay in this career because we mentioned again, and I have to keep repeating this because obviously different people are listening, and I have to say this, that over the years, especially me being a Gen X generation, and by the way, let me say this when you mentioned the internet, I was getting a haircut earlier, and I could not believe looking at every single seat. Everyone was on their iPhone, checking their Facebook,
yes.
not conversing with their barber.
Yeah.
Yet I remember in the 80s and 90s going and just having a chat the entire time.
Of course.
What
We
happened?
called them conversations.
Yeah. You have people standing a foot, 2-3 feet apart, and yet they're on different devices. And what blows me away, Robert Morningstar said this when he was driving with his daughters in the car, and he said he finally realized how we had such a different, different generation with the millennials, that his daughters sitting in the back seat of his car, right, were texting each other. They weren't speaking to each other, probably because they didn't want mom and dad to hear, but they were texting each other, sitting next to each other in the car. I mean, that just blows my mind. But with that being said, let me turn it over to Johnny, since we've already have some questions coming in.
Yeah, we've got a Facebook question from Janice on Facebook in Bristol in England. And she's asking, what can you tell us, Peter, about the latest witness who's broken a 36-year silence to speak out about Britain's famous UFO incident at Rendlesham? His name was Stephen Longero, I think.
Longero, yeah.
Yeah, so, can you tell us an update on that? I know that you've vigorously studied Rendlesham for many, many years. What's your take on his statement?
Well, I was pleased to see that the story not only had broken, but has been now published and republished in publications as mainstream as the Daily News here in New York, UFO-centric publications, and one of the leading British dailies. This is an important story in that it adds one more absolutely credible Air Force eyewitness to parts of what is now commonly known as the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident or the Bentwaters incident. Steve, I consider him a friend, although we've never met. We have been back and forth irregularly with email messaging and in the last year's Facebook messages for years now, and his name comes up a number of times in Left at East Gate, the book on the Rendelsham incident that I co-wrote with eyewitness Larry Warren. He was a friend of Larry's back then and has remained a friend of Larry's. And Steve, like so many of the men who were involved, but chose not to come forward until here we are, more than 36 years later, coming into 36 years. And I have a feeling some people are like, wow, why did he wait so long? Well, if you look at the experiences of Larry Warren as the first witness who came forward, other ones who came forward after him, and who were attacked from all sides. You're doing it for attention. You made it up. You're a wannabe. You're brainwashed. Every possible bit of nonsense put forward about folks like Steve. In fact, the paperwork is all done. He was there. He was assigned on the night in question. He saw what he saw, but rather than have it be the center of his life and cause him to be a target of ridicule, unwanted attention, be at the center of a firestorm, as whistleblowers often are, Steve left the service with an honorable discharge and proceeded to have a family, have a career, raise his kids, now his grandkids, and live his life. And I have nothing but respect and admiration for Steve. I don't think he came forward too late. I think he came forward just at the right time for himself. And thank him, not just for his service to our country, but for his service to the truth and adding his account to those of the other men and women who have already come forward and put theirs on the public record.
Now, I hate to interrupt, and sadly, we have already gone through half of this show. So, everybody, I want you to stay tuned. Literally, just 2 short minutes. We'll be right back with our one and only true guest, Peter Robbins, who will be back on the show very soon to do a full show, since 1 hour is clearly not enough. And honestly, he is someone that I've interviewed several times. And I know if I had unlimited time and we both had unlimited strength and unlimited phone time or Skype time, we can talk for years straight on so many topics. So everybody, stay tuned as we take this quick break, and we'll be right back.
This is George Tsoukalos, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
These creatures are very, very strange. They're anomalous.
It is the age of revelations. Bizarre creatures. The false perception of reality exposed.
Just go to the Dr. J's, website. You'll see it on the left-hand side. It's like right there. Click the link. Guys, what can I tell you? I mean, it's $40, but you get a DVD and a book plus three bonuses: community CD, a year subscription to our Politics, Prophecy, and Supernatural magazine, which comes in your email box. Watchers 3, which is $20 for that DVD. Fingerprints of the Supernatural. We promise you, you will not be disappointed. And Dr. J gets a cut of the proceeds, so everybody's happy. You support him, you support us, and it's all good. And you get to educate yourself on what's going on, because we just scratched the surface here. Trust me.
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Torpedo impact now, 40 seconds. Torpedo impact, 25 seconds.
All ahead flank. All ahead flank. I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was a quick short break, and sorry we had to cut the conversation off, as it is truly flowing with our one and only guest, Peter Robbins. But during the break, we were able to get him to come back. As you know, you are on the show, Dr. J Radio Live, the only truly internationally syndicated radio show on 5 independent networks, not to mention the internet stations you can listen to, 4 on the top of my head, which is, of course, iTunes, TuneIn.com, Shoutcast, and YouTube, even, with live videos showing aliens, UFOs, and etc. Mostly artist renditions and some amazing pictures that were given to us, and videos from the one and only Senor Jaime Maussan, who you will hear back soon. But let me bring back, of course, Johnny Webb to ask our guest, Peter Robbins, a question that has come from a listener. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, hi there, Peter, again. This one's from Christine in Fulham in London on Facebook, and she asked, you were close to Edgar Mitchell, friends of, what did you say to you? Sorry, what did he say to you about these moon landings?
Let me say this real quick, too. We've had a record 14 interviews with him before he passed away, which is really sad because he was really deteriorating in the end. And the last time we pre-recorded his show because he couldn't stay up to do live. I aired him on a Wednesday, and I believe it was the Friday he passed away. So not even 48 hours, more like 36 to 42 hours. Very, very sad. But nonetheless, Johnny Webb finished that question, so Mr. Robbins can answer it.
Sure. She says that you were close to Edgar Mitchell, friends of / What did he say to you about his moon landings? What was the one thing he told sticks in your mind to the UFO phenomenon? And just to throw it in, I wanted to ask, did he ever say to you he was an experiencer himself?
No, he didn't. And I didn't push. When I first met Dr. Mitchell, Edgar, about 25 years ago, like just about everybody else in that room, I just hero worshiped the guy, another extraordinarily courageous, brilliant, principled, and idealistic man who put his principles into practice during his life. The closest, the most intimate kind of thing he shared with me did not have to do with UFOs and their implications per se. It was the one time that I visited his home, which, as you can imagine, was just a wonderful experience. There were so many things there, his own personal memorabilia, things from various missions, honorariums he had received over the years, including a framed photograph of the aircraft carrier that picked up him and his, I believe it was the Apollo 14 team after they returned from the moon. And there it was, framed on his wall to Edgar Mitchell. And I nodded and smiled, and he said, read it carefully. And I did. And I said, Edgar? They forgot the D in Edgar? And we both had a laugh about that, as I'm sure he had with many people. But later in his living room, I was trying to make a joke of it, but I said in so many words, the capsule that you were on, the little machine, was made up of, let's say, several 100,000 moving parts, each one having been constructed by the most competitive government contractor. And was there any time, even for a moment during that mission, that he felt anxious or that the odds might be against them? He didn't even waste a breath. He said, no, never. We were too well trained. Failure was not an option. It was just a matter of problem solving if necessary and following procedures and getting it done. But the moment that I wanted to share with you, and it's, not some big secret. He's spoken about it to groups and written about it. But it came about halfway back on the return trip from the moon. where he and his crew found themselves about 125,000 miles in space, with halfway between the Earth and the moon receding in the distance, the Earth coming up, and thinking to himself in so many words that when he returned to the Earth from the moon, he should probably evaluate his situation and consider doing something perhaps more contributory, idealistic, positive with the remainder of his life. It's a single moment in one person's life, but boy, hearing him say that is something I'll never forget.
You know, speaking of Edgar Mitchell, we've had a lot, like I said, a record 14 interviews in the short amount of time that he, because I obviously didn't get him in my first year of broadcasting in March of 2010. So it took me a couple years, of course, to build up a reputation among all the guests until he finally came around and started doing shows. And he really opened up. He never said that he saw aliens or ships or structures on the moon. However, off the record, he hinted at it. He hinted, which obviously, being someone who studies psychology and a trained attorney and a professional mediator at that too, I knew exactly what he was saying. And then when we had Uri Geller come on, who somehow Edgar Mitchell came up, he said that on a private conversation with Edgar, when they saw each other in person, when Uri was visiting Florida, which he didn't believe in the UFO phenomenon at the time. However, he said on this show, on this very show, that Dr. Mitchell showed him photographs of him in Roswell holding an artifact that seemed to have been hidden from the Air Force. And as you know, they did their darnest to dig up every little piece and threatened everybody to give every piece back, including what Jesse Marcel Sr. brought home to his wife and son to see before he brought it back to the RAF Roswell. But unfortunately, his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., who his last interview ever happened to be on the show, which a very, again, sad person. We've lost a lot of guests, which is really saddens me. And that's why I always like to focus on the generation that is of that generation, because they have so much to say. And a lot of the millennials don't understand it. They think they get things figured out. And I'm not trying to knock people down, because we have a lot of educated listeners spanning, late teens to 60s and even 70s. But the people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even 90s have so much to tell us about their lives, because the turmoils that were going on, as you mentioned, during World War II, nobody, not even me, was around to see the 50 million people who were killed, and then the massacres in the Korean War, not to mention Vietnam. I was able to see the Iraqi War, because the first one, Desert Storm, and Operation Iraqi Freedom, I think it was called. And nonetheless, since they posted journalists with battalions going out there, so this was pretty much a TV show, but it was not the way wars were fought in the past, because we were using more high-tech weapons, smart bombs, and the such. But the weaponry that was used in World War II and Vietnam was, I hate to use the word savagery, but when you're at war, it's either kill or be killed. Using flamethrowers from either people wearing them or the tank flamethrowers that would shoot, I believe, 300 feet, 100 meters, so over 300 feet. Just think about the people that were burned out of bunkers and stabbed with bayonets. But there is so much to be learned from people from that culture. So I urge everybody in the younger generation to please pay attention to your elders. If you have grandparents, spend as much time from them. Get every story and detail of their life, good and bad. Even if it's mediocre to you, it's something important to their life if they're telling it to you. Because once they pass, all we have are their memories and their written records. So I just wanted to say that out there. Now, because we have a whopping 15 minutes left, I did want to talk to you about alien abduction. And the reason I think this is the most important topic when it comes to the UFO phenomenon or the ET phenomenon, and just as Grant Cameron agreed with me, is because the only people that can give us the real records or the real experiences of how these ETs interact with humans, how they interact with each other, what technology they have on their ships, and so on and so forth, is by speaking to people who have actually had contact, whether it had been contact from CE3, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or mostly Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, which are abductions. What do you have to say about that? How the importance of it?
Well, from my point of view, it's what engaged me in becoming involved in this work 40 years ago. As we noted earlier, it is something that happened to a member of my family. And unless you are capable of completely ignoring something like that, it does change you. This past summer, Dr. J, I had a fairly busy speaking schedule at one point in 3 weeks, going from Ohio to Scotland to Greece, and meeting an awful lot of people as I do. As kind of an unusual 3 weeks. I'm in the States more often than not as a speaker, but in August I had the honor of emceeing this past year's International MUFON Symposium, which took place in the Orlando area this year. And it was great fun, always good to see fellow colleagues. The program's lineup was outstanding. And two of the speakers were two friends of mine, two colleagues, who, for me, are two of the most knowledgeable, courageous, and dedicated abduction-related researchers in history. And they are Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner. And we had planned this beforehand, but after the symposium, I moved into Kathy and her husband Charlie's guest house, was there for almost a week. Denise spent a good amount of that time with us. And during that time, we reviewed a fair amount of casework and more recent abduction-related investigation. I also had the privilege of spending an evening with 20 or so members of the abductee support group that Denise has run for many years in Florida. And as was the case 40 years ago when my sister first shared with me her memories to the many years that I worked by Bud Hopkins' side as his assistant in the investigation of certainly several hundred abduction-related cases, I found myself saying, as I do once or twice a year, to myself, my God, this is really happening. This is not some strange mental condition. It is not an illusion or an hallucination or some strange, religious or mystical belief or akin to, bleeding from the signs of the cross at Easter. Other intelligences, I've never been fully comfortable with the word alien, who come and go from parts unknown with impunity through very advanced technology for reasons that we can theorize on but cannot know for sure, who probably represent different groups of thems, take people and examine them and then return them. And this is part of the life that many people on Earth are living. It is really happening. It's, again, not some conspiracy theory and not some, mystical cult. It's really happening. I mention it because having looked into so many individual abduction-related accounts and reports on my own, although the majority with Bud, I hope I never lose the ability to come back to that baseline and feel absolute shock, amazement, and disbelief that this is really happening.
I'm glad you brought Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner up because they are truly outstanding women who have
Boy,
done
are they ever.
a lot of research. I remember the first time I interviewed Denise Stoner, which was with Kathleen Martin.
Oh, great.
And because they wrote a book together. And
yes,
Denise,
the alien abduction files.
Exactly. And Denise herself is an experiencer, and she had a lot to tell, not to mention the what they had, some of the cases that were in that book. Just truly outstanding. With that being said, though, Johnny Webb has another question that came in from Facebook. Go ahead, Johnny.
Great.
Hi, well, we've got another question. It's from Peter in Dudley in the West Midlands in England on Facebook. And he says that you recently came back from a European tour, possibly Greece, Italy, and the UK, traveling sometimes with Richard Doland. And he asked, what did you learn from these European UFO tours and their cases? And the way cases are dealt with within the USA? That's his question.
Well, that's a great question. Thanks for passing it on, Johnny. I was not in Italy this year, although I am available to return at any time for any reason. I will work for food. But I did speak at a conference in Glasgow and then headed to Athens to speak at a very special conference on the UFO work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich, certainly his most neglected. And that conference I did with my dear friend and good colleague Richard Dolan, and then we had a bit of a holiday together in Greece as well. I am glad to report that good research is good research, and half-assed research is just that. Cultures fall away, and basic methods of investigation tend to, be there. They're not culturally attached. Good, patient research and investigation can be found all over the United States, the UK, France, Italy, Japan, Greece, and
my
so
home
can
country. Let me say that.
Yeah. Well, my point is that, and the same ratio of not great research can be found in any country as well. Flashing back for a moment to the internet, there are some phenomenal cases that have broken first on the internet, and certain evidences that have surfaced first on the internet that purport to be everything from an important photograph of a significant truly anomalous UFO to a extraterrestrial artifact or what have you, the great majority of which don't prove to be authentic, or that there simply is no proof. It's something that somebody heard about or that somebody presented. And the same again in different cultures. If you are serious about research and investigation, whether it's in the field, in the library, in somebody's home taking personal accounts, quality work is just that. It's a combination of thoroughness, of patience, of not slacking off and making it your business to cover the subject as thoroughly as you can before publishing your findings. I've tried to follow that model personally, but I've certainly fallen short on a number of occasions where you simply don't go the full 9 yards, and sometimes you very much regret it and pay the price. But I think for me, maybe the most exciting thing about the work that we are all doing in one way or another, practically it's not a very good way to make a living, but in terms of living your life, it is engaging, it is fascinating, often moving. I've met some of the finest people and the dearest people I think I will ever meet in my life through UFO and paranormal-related investigation, and also had this great opportunity to visit places that the chances are excellent I would never have gotten or get to visit if I didn't do the work that I did and wasn't as committed as I am to finding some of these answers, or at least being able to ask better questions.
As have I, and I gotta say, you're absolutely right. You meet some of the most important people, make some of the best friendships, and the topics are so interesting and important. And I gave up a ludicrous career in practicing law to do this for pennies, if that, literally. And as much as I owe in student loans, I think it is far more important because we are so much closer to disclosure than it has ever been. Now, I know we're coming close to the end, so if we can keep you for just a couple more minutes, because we do have one question, another one from London. Let me turn it back to Johnny to go ahead and ask it, and then we'll get to wrap. And then, of course, we have to bring you back for a full show in the next few weeks, because people obviously are writing in live, and as you could tell, they're writing in from across the pond at almost 4 a.m.
Yeah.
So this is how much they are paying attention to what you're saying, not to mention about this topic. Go ahead, Johnny.
Okay, well, this one comes from James. Again, he is from London on Facebook, and he says that he was in New York last month, and he's asking Mr. Robbins, what do you know about UFOs over Manhattan? There have been waves and waves of reports of orbs and UFOs from there online, but they don't seem to make it to the news.
Yeah. There is this myth that only farmers over rural areas see UFOs and have a sixth grade education. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth.
I have a doctorate, and I've met so many people with doctorates that are credible in every sense of the word. I mean, you got Paul Hellyer, Defense Minister of Canada. We have astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell. I mean, unbelievable for people to say this is ridiculous. People who dropped out of grade school. And it's just
well, to get to the question though, the sighting that my sister and I had was 30 miles east of Manhattan, but I have spoken to people who have had daylight sightings around New York City, and most recently, and this is firsthand, in this past February, my two closest colleagues and dearest friends in Japan, Jun and Toshi, came over. I had gotten close to them years ago when I gave several papers at a conference in Japan. And they had 2 days as tourists, and we were walking around Lower Manhattan. And John Kato and his wife Toshi had a group called OurJ, the Organization for UFO Research Japan. And I've attended skywatches with them in Tokyo. I have seen photographs that members of their group have taken of articulated craft over concentrated areas of population in Japan. But we were walking in Battery Park. That's at the very bottom of Manhattan Island, and it's quite open. And John was walking, looking up, and he had his cell phone and small binoculars. And Toshi and I were just chatting, and at one point he called us over. He saw something in the sky. It was, we all saw what it was, and it was, some flotsam and jetsam, whatever. 5 minutes later, he called us back, and he had zoned in on an absolutely disc-shaped, fully articulated thing that most certainly was under intelligent control on a cold, clear, late morning in Lower Manhattan. Most New Yorkers do not walk looking up. They walk looking straight ahead or down, and that's the way it is. I could have been knocked over by a feather. It was the real deal. And I am not one of those people who, sees UFOs very often, a handful of times in my life. But this was one of them. And there it was, far more famous sighting that I was reminded of just yesterday, which was the 36th anniversary of the murder of John Lennon in Manhattan, was the sighting that he had in the 1970s that he writes about on the album Walls and Bridges, and that he spoke about on and off for the rest of his life. There are UFOs over New York City. They're over every area in the world that we know of, and we are still trying to wrap our heads around the whys of it.
Being a New Yorker yourself, Peter, I wanted to ask you, because we're talking of UFOs at the moment in Manhattan, and one that springs to mind, very famous bit of footage, was a Sci-Fi Channel intro from a helicopter. It was people in a tour helicopter around Manhattan, and they're looking out the front of the window of the helicopter at the World Trade Centers, and this disc is sort of right there behind the World Trade Centers, and it sort of creeps past the two of them, and then hangs out a bit, and then flies up to what would be the sort of Harlem way, and then shoots back towards the helicopter and diverts upwards into the clouds and disappears. Have you ever seen that footage? And what's your thoughts on it?
You're bringing up a memory I have not thought of in a long time, but I have a vague memory of it.
The World Trade Center attacks, wasn't it? So
Yeah, well, it would certainly have to, and unfortunately, in the world of conspiracy and Photoshop and increasing fake news, I do remember shortly after 9/11 a series of photos purporting to be UFO-type craft over the Trade Center complex on September 11, 2001. The photos proved to be not authentic. But
well, to be clear about what I was talking about, was a video footage that went out before September 11th attacks, about 6 months.
Oh, yeah, no, the one you were talking about is completely separate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
And within that, the elevation of the actual disc around the World Trade Centers seems to be concurrent to where the attacks took place.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, I know we're coming into the end of our time here, but I will tell you that the famous New York blackout in New York City in 1965, as I recall, or 66, took out the lights of the whole city.
Yes.
And there was some talk that UFOs may have been involved. It just sounds so goofy that even people in the work tend to reject it for all the right reasons. I had a very good friend and a close colleague back then, a remarkable UFO investigator himself, a New York City police detective, Sergeant Pete Mazzola, who died much too young and made some great contributions to the work. But he knew cops who were on patrol that night around the Indian Point nuclear generator, several hours north of Manhattan, who most definitely observed fully articulated disc-shaped UFOs coming over the nuclear power generator there, as everything blinked out. So, using deductive reasoning, I would say there was some involvement in that one.
Yeah, I actually personally had an experience with a flotilla of orbs, in fact, about sort of 2009 it was, and it was the longest day of the year. And I was driving back from Tunbridge Wells in Kent in England, going towards the centre of London, coming from the southeast, going northwest. And I noticed this flotilla on my left of about 20 orbs. They were about 300 feet away in distance, but about sort of 800 feet up. And as I looked at them, I said to my mate sitting next to me, "Look at that." And he went, "No, I'm not having it." I said, "What do you mean you're not having it? You can clearly see that that's orbs." And he went, no, that's a constellation. I said, "No, look again. You can see the constellations behind that." And he wasn't having it. So I didn't want to argue, and I didn't get upset or frustrated. I just carried on driving and ignored the whole situation. But within a couple of minutes in front of me, I noticed a pillar of orbs. It almost looked like what is today called an Ibani, or a space serpent, which is like a cluster of orbs all joining together in a rope sort of formation, 4 and 4 and 4 and 4 on top. And it goes up. And it's, as I got closer to this pillar of orbs, that must have been 400 feet in the sky, you know. It was very high. And I got to the bottom of it in this field as I came close to it. And my friend was panicking at this point, saying, "Don't stop, John, don't stop. You've got kids in the car." It's you know, every excuse in the book. But when I slowed down enough to look at it, the pillar was about 400 feet up. It was consistent of 4 orbs and then 4 orbs going underneath. And as the 4 joined, it would rise up slightly. The base of the pillar was about 30 foot from the ground. It wasn't actually on the ground. And as I looked in the distance in this field, there was hundreds of orbs collating, and independent intelligence was what was clear about it. And they were just sort of floating in and out of this field and collectively knowing who was going to join at the bottom of this pillar next. And I as I was there in such a short time, I noticed about 4 join from different parts of the field, from standstill floating motions to an absolute speed of getting right underneath it, and then an instant stop, and then this pillar would rise up again. And I'd say each orb was at the closest, was about 5 foot round. You know, it was like something out of The Wizard of Oz when the White Witch turns up in this big orb. You know, they were like that, but translucent. They had an orangey, white, yellow, red, orangey, white, yellow sort of flashy glow that was from the center that was emanating this light. But it was almost like umbilical. It was sort of embryotic in a sense. It was translucent, all of them independently, and they all knew what they were doing. And I noticed it. He noticed it. At that point, we concurred that, you know, we are seeing what we're seeing, and let's get out of here. But I never felt fear myself. He was petrified. I asked my daughter what she felt. She said, "I feel a little bit scared." I said, "What do you see?" And she said, "Well, they look like jelly beans." But anyway, we carried on driving. But that was my experience, and I can say clearly they wasn't anything of this earth. They certainly weren't mechanical or anything like that.
And let me add to this too. I've had 2 that were mass, and I mean mass sightings that were unexplainable. One of them that happened to be in Greece, where you spoke, I believe, a few times, and it was all over the news in every paper. This was in 1990 in the summer. And for 3 straight days, this was the headline, top headline. And you could not go anywhere without people talking about it, because so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of the whopping 10 million, maybe 11 million people that now live in the Greek Greek mainland and the 3,200 islands. But mind you, some of those islands are as small as a house, which are uninhabited. So there are some larger islands such as Mykonos, Patmos, etc. But nonetheless, there are, based on the Olympics, from when I saw all the countries coming in, I think we're over 200 countries now, I believe, not 190, over 200 at this point. And there have been sightings in every single country. This is not a Western world phenomenon in the UK, Soviet Union, and United States. This is truly something that people have experienced all over the world, and people have been abducted. Now, before I get Mr. Robbins' final question, I do want to ask if you could just hang by for 30 seconds after the show real quick, just to thank you and tell you something else real quick. Let me start the closing out of this show. Of course, as you know, everybody, we archive all our shows for free on, of course, YouTube. What is the name? It's the name of the show. And just like I said earlier, every social media site such as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Slack, Snapchat, things I don't even know. I just know there's Dr. J Radio Live. Again, and our website, drjradiolive.com. You can click on the YouTube link, and that will take you to the videos. Now, there are a lot that haven't been made or released yet, so just follow them and they will get released. And when they are released, they also are set out to Twitter, Google Plus, and not to mention Facebook. So keep a watch out for that. Not to mention, we also have, which is something that has only happened in the last few months, since we've had our new webmaster on board, all the guests that have been on the show since he's been on, which has been over 2 years, have literally their books and videos on the site. So all you have to do is go to drjradiolive.com and click on books and videos, scroll down to the guests, such as Peter Robbins, and it'll take you to their Amazon page where you can purchase their books and videos. And sometimes it'll have two links, such as their website and the Amazon page. And with that being said, of course, I want to thank all the international listeners for staying awake, not to mention the people here in America, and the people who truly believe in this topic and this show, and of course Johnny Webb. But most importantly, I do want to thank our guest, Peter Robbins. Now, with that being said, Mr. Robbins, like I said, please hang on for a quick 30 seconds after the show. But I would like to get your final statement and anything else you'd like to plug in before we go.
Not really. I invite anybody that's interested to visit my Facebook page or my website, Peter Robbins NY. I'm posting, as we move into the new year, upcoming speaking dates. I will have a new book out sometime during the new year, and can discuss that in a future show. Otherwise, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you guys for an enjoyable hour here that has always gone too fast.
I would want to say you're welcome, but honestly, it's thank you for joining us. And of course, you are an incredible guest. Really, down to earth, good-hearted person who I've always had a great friendship with on and off the air. And I love speaking to you, and I would really like to get you back in the next few weeks to talk about that upcoming book and to do a long show. Like you said, this show ran way too quickly, even though we happened to go 15 minutes over, even though I spent just 3 short minutes in the introduction and 2 more minutes for the break. We still got a good hour and 10 minutes out of you. So with that being said, thank you all. This is Dr. J, and I am officially signing off for the night. Join us Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and be sure to check out drjradiolive.com for upcoming guests. Remember, we do post only the guest for the night of. Therefore, you're not going to see the whole week's guests. You have to check the site daily or check Facebook or all those. So if you want to see who's on next Thursday, please check either Wednesday night or Thursday during the day. Now, in the past, what we used to do is at the end of a show, it would be automatically set up to where the next guest would pop up. So sometimes that happens. You will find it the night before, but more importantly, check several hours before the show so you see who's coming on. And that is why I always give you guys a chance to have a quick look at all the social media to see who our guest is of the night. With that being said, we want to thank you all, for those in the United States and North and South America, not to mention Hawaii, and of course UK and beyond. All those people in, say, Asia, and of course Australia and New Zealand, who are listening and constantly writing in questions. So we want to thank them all. And that's it, folks. Join us Tuesday night with more talk on alternative topics, plus some more news. And with that being said, I am officially signing off.